2 minutes ago, something unusual happened in Washington, and it wasn't marked by sirens, speeches, or breaking alerts scrolling endlessly across television screens, but by something far more noticeable to those who study power closely: silence, a sudden, deliberate quiet that replaced what had been a steady stream of statements, briefings, and carefully measured warnings about Russia. And in global politics, silence is rarely accidental, because when a government as vocal as the United States abruptly lowers its public tone, it often signals a shift not in concern but in strategy. And today that shift has raised a single question across diplomatic circles, intelligence communities, in allied capitals around the world: why now and why quiet? For weeks, Washington had maintained a predictable rhythm when addressing Russia: firm language, public reassurance to allies, controlled warnings aimed as much at international audiences as at Moscow itself. But then, without advance notice, that rhythm stopped. Press briefings became cautious. Language softened or disappeared entirely, and officials who once spoke openly began choosing their words with unusual restraint, not denying tensions, not escalating them either, but leaving a noticeable vacuum where commentary used to be. And that vacuum immediately drew attention, because when power steps back from the microphone, it usually does so to reposition behind the scenes. Historically, moments like this have often appeared before significant diplomatic moves, strategic recalibrations, or quiet negotiations that governments prefer not to conduct under the glare of public expectation. And Washington has used this approach before, especially during periods when pressure must be applied without triggering overreaction, because loud warnings can corner an opponent, while silence forces them to guess. And guessing is uncomfortable. Analysts note that this quiet does not suggest disengagement or indecision, but rather control, as public rhetoric has limits, and once those limits are reached, continuing to speak can reduce flexibility, locking leaders into positions they may later want to adjust. So by going quiet, Washington regains room to maneuver, allowing diplomats, military planners, and intelligence agencies to operate without the burden of constantly aligning with public statements that adversaries can exploit. From Moscow's perspective, this sudden silence complicates planning, because when signals become less visible, risk calculations change, intentions become harder to read, and uncertainty becomes a strategic pressure in itself. And uncertainty forces leaders to slow down, reassess, and prepare for multiple outcomes instead of reacting to a single clear narrative. Allies, too, are watching closely, because when Washington reduces public commentary, it often increases private coordination, and behind closed doors, conversations tend to become more detailed, more specific, and more consequential, even if the public hears less. And in many cases, this quieter phase precedes stronger alignment among partners, as consensus is built quietly rather than debated loudly. Another reason for the silence may be timing, because global attention cycles move quickly, and strategic actors sometimes choose to step back publicly to let events unfold, to observe reactions, to see how markets respond, how allies adjust their messaging, and how the other side behaves when not directly addressed. Since behavior in the absence of pressure often reveals more than behavior under it. There is also the matter of escalation control, because words once spoken can take on lives of their own, amplified by media, interpreted by audiences far beyond their original intent, and used by adversaries to justify countermoves. So by saying less, Washington reduces the risk of misinterpretation while still maintaining the ability to act decisively if needed. This approach aligns with a broader pattern in modern statecraft, where influence is increasingly exercised through posture, coordination, and quiet signaling rather than dramatic declarations, and where restraint is sometimes a more powerful message than rhetoric, especially in an era where every word is instantly global. Some observers suggest that the silence may also reflect internal reassessment, not of goals but of methods, as policymakers weigh how best to achieve stability without unintended consequences, balancing deterrence with diplomacy and pressure with flexibility, because the objective is not noise but outcome. It is important to understand that quiet does not mean absence and silence does not mean retreat. In fact, history shows that some of the most significant shifts in international relations occurred during periods when public communication slowed, not increased. Because real decisions were being shaped away from cameras and headlines. The challenge for observers is that silence invites speculation, and speculation can amplify anxiety, but that reaction itself underscores the power of quiet. Because it draws attention precisely by withholding information, forcing analysts and adversaries alike to consider possibilities they might otherwise ignore. For Russia, the absence of familiar signals removes a reference point, making it harder to gauge Washington's next move and in strategic terms. Removing predictability can be a deliberate choice designed to regain initiative without provoking immediate confrontation. As the world watches, what matters most is not what has been said in the last 2 minutes, but what may be happening in the spaces between statements, in private channels, in strategic calculations, and in decisions that do not require public confirmation to have real-world impact. Silence in this context becomes a form of communication in itself, one that suggests confidence, patience, and readiness rather than hesitation, and while the public may hear less, the message being sent may be clearer to those it is intended for. Whether this quiet marks the beginning of a new phase in US-Russia relations or simply a pause before the next shift remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: when Washington suddenly goes quiet, it is rarely because nothing is happening, and far more often because something important already is.